Everyone, and good afternoon and welcome to the 52 Weeks of Leadership. We're going to give it just about 30 seconds to get started to make sure everyone's got a chance to get in and turn on their sound. Well, hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or whatever the case may be, wherever you are, knowing that we've got people who log on to this from all over the world and even might be watching this online later. And welcome to what I believe is the 38th installment, forgive me if I'm wrong, I have trouble with counting, of the 52 Weeks of Leadership, our year-long leadership development webinar program here at the University of Buffalo School of Management, offered by the Center for Leadership and Organizational Effectiveness. Hi, my name is Jim. And I'm the faculty director of this organization, working alongside Molly Anderson, our executive director. We do our best to bring research and practice together. Wanted to, first up, as you can see on the screen, thank our sponsor, Geico, who's made all 52 weeks of the 52 weeks possible. So Geico Careers, thank you very much for that, and let you know about an upcoming program we've got, and one of the best kinds for Chloe. It's one of the free ones. We've got our Leaders on Leadership series coming up on October 1st from 4 to 5 p.m. United States Eastern Time. We're going to have a virtual shindig sponsored by the School of Management Alumni Association on innovation and fintech leadership. We'll have an expert panel from companies like Visa, Merrill Lynch, Quint Capital. So we'd love to see you there. Again, that'll be on October 1st from 4 to 5 p.m. If she hasn't yet, Molly will be putting the registration details in the chat. Innovation and fintech leadership. Well, I am excited because we've got a little bit of something special for everybody today as I take the title screen off and switch to the main event. We're going to do, instead of an academic presentation, as we often have in these 52 weeks of leadership sessions, we've got someone to tell us a little bit about how we're going to put it into practice. Mr. Mark Klein is the chairman of the firm at Hodgson Russ. Okay, this is embarrassing. I went on mute. How long have I been on mute?
Not that long.
Not that long. Okay, I'm going to start over with the main event here. I'm not sure what just happened there, but let me introduce our speaker, who was happy enough to let me know that I was on mute. So, you know, he's ahead of most of us with the Zoom etiquette already. Mr. Mark Klein is the chairman of the firm of Hodgson Russ, with over 35 years of experience with tax law, chair of the state and local taxation section of the AC Accounting Society. He must be humble because he sent over a long bio and said, oh no, this is too long, shorten it. And I said, no, they need to know about this stuff. He's editor of New York Tax Highlights, contributing editor of CCH's Guideline to New York Taxes, co-author of CCH's New York Residency and Allocation Audit Handbook, CCH's New York Sales and Use Tax Answer Book, several others. But more importantly, as I said, chairman of the firm of Hodgson Russ. Has been quoted by the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Associated Press, Miami Herald, CNBC, just recently appeared on CNN, named 2021 Lawyer of the Year in the new edition of the Best Lawyers in America, admitted in New York, Florida, New Jersey before the U.S. Supreme Court. But forget about all that. Most importantly, a graduate of the UB School of Law. Mark Klein, thank you for joining us to talk today about understanding leadership development and developing leadership competencies. And let me just start off with this. For those who don't know, because I am not a Buffalo native, so I only found this out after I moved here, Hodgson Russ is one of the oldest companies in the United States, founded 1817. Did I get that right?
You are correct.
So over 200 years old. I imagine you don't reach that level of sustainability without thinking a lot about succession planning and developing the next generation of leaders. And that's something that I know a lot of organizations struggle with. What have been some of your keys to this challenge?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. We really are just getting into a sense of succession planning as an important factor in our firm. And by the way, I don't mean to correct you, but when you refer to us as a company, I got to tell you, we don't really think of ourselves as a company. We don't have the same hierarchical structure that you would see in a regular company. We're like a lot of professional service organizations, Jim. We're a partnership. And we treat our partners like just that. They're our partners. They're not our employees. And even our associates, our younger people, we don't have them report to this person or that person. These are individuals who are professionals. They know their craft. They learned their craft, possibly at the University at Buffalo, where I did. And they are always looking for help or mentoring or this. But it's not as though, we have this, this is the boss and this boss has a supervisor, then we've got a vice president. Basically, we try to run the organization as a group of professionals, all we hope rowing in the same direction with the same similar goals. As far as succession planning, I think that's something that we really didn't focus on until, probably the last few years effectively. Historically, what we've done for 200 years is that we have our lawyers. As our lawyers progress, they become more and more integrated into what we do at the firm, who our clients are, what we work with. And the older they get, they then take management positions at the firm. And a lot of us recognize that that may not make the most sense. It's kind of like the Peter principle, right? Where you continue to become elevated until you become incompetent, in which case you no longer get elevated. And I think just because you're a great lawyer doesn't mean you're a great leader. And I think one of the frustrations we've always had, Jim, is that at our place, and you've heard me say this and others have, but the biggest frustration I had when I became chair and I started thinking about succession is the way our firm and most firms work, which is, if we're looking for the next chair or the next managing partner, and we were to put an ad in the paper, it would read something like, wanted, person to run a $100 million enterprise, no experience required. That to me is nonsensical, which is one of the reasons we started to think about succession planning.
Wow. Now let me actually, there's so much there to dig into, but let me take a step back. You corrected me at the very beginning of your answer, and you said, well, we don't necessarily think of ourselves as a company, so much as we do a partnership. There's so much that I want to dig into in your answer, but let me start with that. Do you think that model could work, should work for other organizations? Is that, what do you think about that?
I think so. I mean, it's worked quite well for us for 200 plus years. I think as long as you have a core group of, whether you call them employees or associates or whatever, that recognize that their efforts are important to their clients, important to their colleagues, helping out their communities, I think it can help. I think the idea of having a boss is a little, frustrating to some people. And I think that the idea that we're all equals and that we're all working for the same organization, trying to achieve the same goals, puts us on par with each other. And it takes away the intimidation that you might get from, your direct report or something of that sort. So yeah, I think it is worth thinking about.
Are there people at Hodgson Russ that are surprised by that mindset? And if so, how do you introduce them to the new one?
Well, I think that in my business and, professional service businesses, I don't think it's that uncommon, but we do see it among the staff who are not used to it. And I think once they realize that, and it sounds so corny, that when you join a firm like ours, you're not just working for us, you are part of us. They say, you're a family, but there's a lot of truth to that. And we really do try to integrate people into our culture and into who we are. We want them to be who we are, because we're nothing other than a reflection of our people. And the way we don't sell widgets, right? We don't have an automobile that we can sell you and have you impressed. It's us, it's our skills, it's our communication abilities, it's our creativity, and it's our legal skills. That's what people are buying. And so it's only a matter of having people care about the institution enough to really have that throughout the firm recognized, so that the ones at the top are sure to act that way and recognize that. And I think, Jim, that filters down to the lowest levels.
You bet, you bet. And there's a lot of research backing for this. Actually, one thing you're making me think of was there's a definition of an organization's culture that's been around for, well, it's been around for about 10 years, but it took decades for professors to come up with it. And that definition is a shared understanding among everyone who works in the organization
Yep.
that this is who we are and this is how we do things. And that's exactly what that sounds like.
Yeah, and quite frankly, we have our mantra around here is that we try to follow the 3 C's, right? The things that are most important to our organization, 3 C's: clients, colleagues, and our community. Obviously, clients the most important because those are the folks that we serve. But number 2, just as important, our colleagues. We want to be a collegial place to work. We want to be a place where people want to work, right? You spend more time working than you do usually with your spouse or family during the course of any year, right? Other than, sleep time where you don't get a lot of interaction. So we want this to be a place that you want to stay at. And interestingly enough, we have a tremendous track record of keeping people that have been here. I mean, I've been here 39 and a half years. I think, when you talk about a lot of organizations, that kind of staying power doesn't exist. But even our younger people stay with us forever. And I guess the most telling aspect is every once in a while when people do leave, but it's also not uncommon for them to think that the grass really wasn't greener on the other side, and then they contact us to say, what, would you mind if I came back? So that says a lot too.
Well, let's dive into those 3 C's. I'm glad you mentioned those. One thing that I talk a lot about is a group called the Business Roundtable, which is 200 of the top CEOs in the world. They released a statement 2 years ago, just before COVID, saying that businesses, for-profit organizations in the modern world can't just be focused on making money anymore. And I'm focusing here on your C of community here. They said that in the modern world, businesses have to, and leaders specifically have to look beyond that and focus not just on finances, but also not incentive, but also customers, employees, partners, and communities. Is that part of leadership development at Hodgson Russ?
Absolutely. And I think it's become more pronounced as a result of COVID. I think one of the things we've learned is that you can work remotely from practically anywhere. And that's a good thing and maybe not so good of a thing, because now there's a talent war going on, at least in my industry, where we're losing some very good people and also gaining some very good people, regardless of geography. And quite frankly, as a Buffalo-based firm, we don't offer the same compensation package that you'd get out in California or New York City. And yet, if a New York City firm can tell somebody who's based in Buffalo, look, you can stay in Buffalo, you don't have to come to New York City, you can do your legal work remotely and we'll pay you the New York City scale, we're going to be in trouble, except for the intangible of the fact that people want to work for us. People stay because of our connection to colleagues, because of our commitment to our communities. Those are the things, Jim, that distinguish us from just a firm that their sole goal is to make money. I think if that's the only concern that you've got, you're going to go through a lot of people and maybe you'll make more money, but I don't think you'll find that your workplace is a place that you really enjoy going to every day for 40 years.
So it sounds great, but how do you get to that? Everything you've just said is, well, a lot of what you just said is against the conventional wisdom on leadership, on management. It's not the kind of thing that pops up a lot in company leadership trainings. How do you ensure that your culture really does trickle down from those guiding principles at the top?
It starts at the top, right? We make it clear to all of our folks that let's say the community is important to them. And we have, organizations that we work with, whether it's Habitat for Humanity, or I could go through the entire list. We encourage people to take advantage of these opportunities. We try to be philanthropic ourselves, both personally as a firm. We donate a lot of money to a lot of organizations. Recently, we had the Ride for Roswell. The firm said, you know what, for the first, I think it was 20 people who sign up, we will pay your initial fee, which I think was $100 a head. We put our money where our mouth is, I guess is what I'm saying. And that trickles down as well. People realize that we're serious. And as far as our commitment to colleagues, quite frankly, when we have people who are not acting collegial, when people are not working out, we will either talk with them, send them for remedial training, or ultimately, if we have to, we'll ask them, that this is maybe not the platform for you. So we take real action when we see issues with respect to these. And I think people recognize, wow, that trait really is important to Hodgson Russ.
So let's take a step back now. So the title of this talk is Developing Leadership Competencies. But I've actually had arguments about this with people. Do you even think that's possible? And what I'm saying by this is I had a conversation with a top executive here in West New York who swore to me, leaders are born, not made. There's only so much leadership development can do. What's your take on that?
I think I wouldn't say leaders are born. I disagree. I think was that Vince Lombardi who said that. I think I disagree with that. But there are certain traits that, although not innate, are traits that you develop at a very young age. Integrity, right? To me, one of the most important elements that anybody brings to the workplace is integrity. That to me is, it's an immutable fact. You need to have that. Can you learn that? I would suggest that if you have integrity and you reflect it, you've probably learned it by the time you were in high school. So although that, I don't think that can be taught after that period of time. On the other hand, I do think that most leadership attributes can be learned because you need the experience, you need the trial, and quite frankly, the error. That's how you learn what works and doesn't work for your particular organization. So I think I disagree with the idea that leaders are born. I think leaders can be trained and leaders can learn from what they're doing and what works and what doesn't work. Mistakes are one way that we really can learn how to act in the future. So I disagree with the statement.
Okay, so and I'm on your side, and the research backs you up. And I just realized I should have said earlier, if you've got any questions for Mark, we will be taking them at the end, but feel free to put them in the chat. So leadership can be trained then. Some organizations I've worked with have as many as 50 different leadership competencies that they prioritize for their managers. I've worked with a couple who only have 3. I don't know how many you personally ascribe to, but what do you think are the most important ones? If you've got someone who you're moving into a leadership role for the first time, and maybe it's a professional, someone who's really good at their job, you want to make sure the Peter Principle doesn't go into effect. What are the most important competencies you're really going to try to hammer home?
I think one of the things, look, number one is integrity. You have to be honest and truthful and straightforward. And if you don't have that, it's the end of the story. You need somebody who can encourage people, somebody with empathy who recognizes what people are going through. I think you also need to lead change through inspiration. How do you inspire people to do the very things that are important to us? I think that's absolutely critical. And I think you've got to be forward looking. You've got to recognize, how you can make things better, but looking to the future, where do you want to be in 1, 3, 5 years? To me, you've got to have that sense of focus on the future because, if you do a great job today and that's all you do, you won't be well positioned because look, like any business, we're competitive, right? We've got competitors who are always nipping at our heels and we need to stay ahead of that. We need to demonstrate that we are forward thinking and we need a leader that does that as well, I think.
So at Hodgson Russ, I mean, you've been around a long time. Companies look at your track record in awe and envy. So what have you found from your experience is the most effective way to develop these competencies in leaders, make sure they've got the skills they need to succeed?
Well, obviously, one of the ways is working with the University of Buffalo. I think the Center for Leadership Development has done a great job for us. And I think one of the things we're doing, and it's really a more of a recent development, is we're starting to put our younger leaders through your course and others to try to give them a sense of how these leadership competencies are critical and how to employ them, how to get people to follow you, not because you're their boss, but because they want to follow you. That's the key in my mind to a good leader, not having intimidation that forces somebody to do what you tell them, but having them inspired enough that they want to do what you're asking them to do because it makes sense to them and they realize it's good for the entire organization. And I guess one other thing that I think is absolutely critical in any leader is a great deal of selflessness. I think there are many times where an individual needs to do what's best for the organization that may or may not be best for them personally. That to me is something that is really essential in a good leader.
So a few things there. First up, wasn't expecting the plug for our leadership development programs, but we appreciate that at the Center.
You owe me $20 now.
It's in the mail, sir. Second, you said something that that I feel very strongly about, and this actually goes back to something I said way back in week 1 of the 52 weeks of leadership. Go check the video if you don't believe me. That leadership is all about, the difference between leadership and management is getting people to do things because they want to, not because they have to. And that's, everybody says that sounds amazing, that sounds noble, that sounds like the best way to do it, but easier said than done. What's your secret?
We do what we ask others to do. Regardless of your place at this firm, if you need people to stay late to get something out, I would expect that you would stay late as well. Not just your assistant, not just your secretary. We should never ask people to do things we wouldn't be willing to do ourselves. And people see that. They see our commitment, the professionals' commitment to the clients, the professionals' commitment to the organization. And I think as a result of them seeing that, they recognize that we put our money where our mouth is. And we walk the walk and we talk the talk, but we actually do what we say. I think that resonates with people.
So as far as identifying people, these are the kinds of people we really want to develop. I think this is a person, and this is, I'm actually going to ask a question. This is something that we're researching here right now. So I'm just really interested in your opinion on this. Does it say anything to you if someone, let's say you've got two candidates in mind for a potential leadership position, you're thinking either one of these would be great, and one of them is gung-ho and says, I want to do this, I want to take charge, this excites me, and the other one seems a little bit more reluctant actually to lead. They're like, I'm not sure I'm ready for that. What does that say to you?
Well, it says a number of things. I think anyone who's aggressively looking for a leadership role makes me nervous, because I wonder if there is some ulterior motive. Are they looking for power? Are they looking for glory? Do they want to change their letterhead to say, I'm the boss or whatever? To me, that goes exactly against what we just mentioned, selflessness, right? The goal of being a leader is not to increase your own value, but to increase the organization's value to everyone. So on the other hand, if somebody says, I'm not interested, I think it's very tough to make people lead who don't want to. I think you do two things. Number one, it's not good for the individual because you're asking them to take on a job that they don't want to do. And secondly, it's not good for the organization because the odds are if they don't want to do it and their heart isn't into it, they're not going to do a great job. So I think I'm not looking for someone in either extreme. I'm looking for somebody who's good, competent, and wants to help.
Okay. So in your massive experience with Hodgson Russ, what's the biggest lesson you've learned? And if you're willing, let me be more specific. Was there a time when, in hindsight, you saw, wow, we really messed up that instance of leadership development? Here's what we've learned. Here's how we can do it better.
Yeah, I think that there was an assumption that really good lawyers are really good managers, and that's not the case. And in our business, the biggest problem with the assumption that a really good lawyer should go into management is that really good lawyers bill at really good rates. They're some of our more productive, profitable people. And so it's very difficult to take somebody out of the business when they're a profitable entity and convert them into management. I think the mistakes that we've made historically is that we haven't given that a lot of thought. And I don't know that we've really been able to identify those situations where it makes the most sense. But clearly, the profitability of the business, the viability of the business is important. If the business isn't around, everything else falls apart. So I think that's a tough wire to balance yourself on. But I think that's probably the biggest error historically, that, great lawyers make great managers.
Well, I don't think that's unique to you. From my own sales background, I always heard, well, great salesmen probably can lead salesmen very well. I think that's endemic. I get the same thing from my wife. Apparently, in the healthcare field, the best nurses, the best doctors should be in charge of the department. The smartest professors should be the deans. Things like that. So it's what we're talking about. This isn't easy stuff, right? And it's not intuitive.
Right.
In fact, research shows, and my own experience, and sounds like maybe you've encountered this too. A lot of organizations say, we just don't have time for this. If you're the top performer, you're going to be the manager. And I've even heard, especially during COVID, wow, we're all so caught up in trying to figure out the new normal. We're just trying to survive. We're trying to get through. We can just trust that managers will learn this as we go. And we're getting close to the end of our time here, so maybe this is a good way to end. What do you say to those organizations who say, look, Mark, this sounds great, but is this really realistic? Do we have time for this?
Well, look, it's a skill set that isn't something that you naturally come up with, in my mind. It is a skill set that you need to spend time, effort, and resources on because it's critical to the future success of your business, right? The idea isn't just that we're going to do well today. The idea is that we've got to set the table so that we're in a really good place tomorrow and the day after that. And if you don't invest a little bit of time and effort and resources in your next generation, you're going to be in a heap of trouble, at least in my mind.
Yeah, and the research backs you up on that so much. There's so many organizations that feel like they have to focus on short-term survival, especially during a crisis, and then they
Right.
just dig the hole a little bit deeper by deeper. Well, Mark, thanks very much for joining us. That's all the questions I had for you. I see one that's come up in the chat, and if you've got one, we've got a couple of minutes, so feel free to put that in. It says I should ask you if your organization has established core values, and if so, what are they, and how do those core values impact your colleagues' behavior on the job?
So yeah, we do have a set of core values. You know, when you walk into our lobby, you'll see the things that really guide us. But I think it goes back to the 3 C's. I think the core values of our organization are captured with clients, colleagues, and communities. That says it all. You know, we absolutely have an obligation to be the best professionals we can for our clients, but we need to take care of our colleagues so that we have an organization that will continue. And we want to recognize the communities that allow us to serve our clients and allow us to live with our families, whether it's, you know, here in Buffalo, our New York City office, Toronto, Florida, we're all over the place. And it's important to us to thank the communities that we're in. So I think the way, you know, and when the folks see the amount of resources that we spend to take care of our communities, when they see the resources we spend to ensure our colleagues are happy, and they know how great we are at taking care of our clients, I think those principles then flow down to everyone.
I'm sure you've had instances where you hire or bring on a top performer, and it just becomes evident that they don't really buy in necessarily to all three of those C's. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, well, we deal with them in a way that either they adopt the 3 C's or we recognize that this may not be the platform for them. And I think, you know, quite frankly, that says it all with respect to existing partners and associates. When they see what happens to somebody who doesn't buy in to what we think is critical, you know, the most important principles in our firm, um, they recognize that either they have a choice, you know, they can get on the bus or the bus will leave without them.
Sujata asks, can you comment on how sharing information helps your leaders lead?
Well, I think it's critical that we all see how we're doing compared to each other, because one of the things about taking care of your colleagues is the recognition that you're not, let's say, killing yourself while everybody else is playing golf on Thursdays and Fridays. So sharing information about what we all do is important because it makes us responsible to each other, right? We are now looking at everybody's commitment to the firm, which I think is critical. The more information that's shared, the better. Similarly, with respect to client information, I want folks to know that, you know, such and such a client is a great client for us and that we should continue to work with them. We want people to change their behavior, or at least make sure they conform their behavior with ways to continue to make us as successful as we are.
Rick asks, did you have a mentor or mentors to help you internalize at least some of the key leadership competencies that you've discussed? And if so, how did they help you?
Yeah, I did the same thing that I hope our younger people do. I watched the people who were senior before, you know, when I first started. I had the great pleasure and honor of working with a gentleman named Dick Heath, who since passed on, who was the head of our tax group. And he was the most down-to-earth, selfless individual that I ever knew. He was also a brilliant tax lawyer, went to Harvard, taught at Harvard. I mean, the guy had it all. And I think I realized very early on when a client was very impressed with Dick and said to Dick, I want you to work on this new project. And Dick then gave it to me. Now, I'm this young guy out of law school. You know, he wants me to handle this important client relationship. And he said, I trust you. I know you know what you're doing. Go with it. And, I'm not looking for credit. He didn't want to keep the client or make sure he was the biller or anything like that, so that somehow he would be credited. He was very, very careful about that. He was the most modest individual you'd ever want to meet. And he did what's right for the organization. And I lived that, right? I learned that through people like Dick Keith, or another one of my mentors, Paul Como, who very similarly would bring in work and say, here, Mark, you take it, it's your client. That's something I don't think, and again, I know you don't deal with a lot of law firms necessarily, but I think you will find that is a rare trait among lawyers.
Well, I see we're coming up at 12:30. So let me just say, Mark, that's fantastic material. That's a great practical perspective. And as a professor, let me just say, I love the fact that pretty much everything you said is backed up by lots and lots of research that nobody ever reads or hears about. So I'm glad you came out to say it and share it with all of us. So thank
My
you
pleasure.
very much, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up next week, we're going to have Aaron O'Brien from right here at the University of Buffalo to talk about the ins and outs of pandemic leadership and lessons learned. So I hope you'll join us. Until then, don't forget that you can find all of the recordings if you missed any of the 37 previous installments of 52 Weeks of Leadership on our website, the Center for Leadership and Organizational Effectiveness. Just Google 52 Weeks of Leadership and they'll pop right up. Thanks again, Mark. Everybody, have a great week. We'll see you back here next week. Same time, same place.
Bye now.